All right, we are looking at 3C.3. I can solve quadratic equations with imaginary solutions by using the quadratic formula. So we're doing the same thing, but now our solutions are going to be imaginary. And remember, imaginary solutions have that I. Okay? So, x squared minus 6x plus 13 equals 0. This is in the correct order. Our x squared is first, then our x, then our 13. So we have that 1 in front of the x squared, negative 6, and positive 13. So I'm going to plug these into my formula. Remember, using parentheses. So we have x equals the opposite parentheses plus or minus the square root parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses all over 2 parentheses. So every letter is replaced with parentheses. Everything else stays exactly the same. So our first letter is B. Inside the parentheses, I put negative 6. There's a negative and a negative together, right? That does happen. Again, our next letter is B, so negative 6 in there. Our next letter is A, so 1 goes in there. Our next letter is C, and then our letter on the bottom is A. So we have our 3 pieces. X equals the opposite of negative 6 is positive 6. We type in what's in the square root, right? Do not type the square root in your calculator, just what's inside of it, with parentheses and everything, especially with these negative numbers. So it's parentheses negative 6 and the parentheses squared. Okay, and we get negative 16. So we have 6 plus or minus 16 all over, right? And 2 times 1 is 2. So now this is a negative, so I'm going to split it up like we've done before, right? If we have a negative, we just pull that negative 1 out. So x equals 6 plus or minus, the square root of 16 is 4, and anytime we have that negative 1, right, it becomes I. So we come over here to split it. So we have x equals 6 plus 4i over 2, and x equals 6 minus 4i over 2. I cannot combine a 6 and a 4i. Those aren't like terms. So I just divide both of them. When I divide those, right, I can actually divide 6 over 2. 6 over 2 is 3, and 4 over 2 is 2. Okay, so I get 3 plus 2i and 3 minus 2i. Okay. All right, and that's it. So the whole first part is the same, and then here when we pull out the negative 1, our simplifying gets a little different, but otherwise it's the same. Looking at our next one, right, it is already in the correct form. So our A is 3 in this case, our B is 8, and our C is 7. So we get x equals the opposite parentheses plus or minus the square root of parentheses squared I'm just going to erase this little mark. So again, our first letter is B, and so B is 8. B is 8. Our next letter is A. A is 3. C is 7. and 2 is 3. So x equals -8 plus or minus. And again, we type this whole piece in our calculator. Without that, right, we don't type the square root in our calculator. We still need it in our work. As I type it in. No square root. So 8 squared so we have 8 squared minus 4 times 3 times 7. So we get -20 in here. Okay. So same thing, we have a negative under our square root. Okay, so we pull that -1 out. And then that -1 becomes our I. Right? Being very careful that the I is not under, right? My square root ends, and then I write my I. So now I just split it. So x equals -8 plus square root 20, I, and x equals -8 minus square root 20, I. Again, we can't add anything, so it's going to be -8/6 plus square root 20 over 6i, and x equals -8, forgot the over 6, sorry, -8/6 minus square root 20 over 6i. -8 over 6, if I type that in a calculator, it does reduce to -4/3. This does not reduce. So those are my two answers. -4/3 plus square root 20 over 6i, and -4/3 minus square root 20 over 6i. Right. Go ahead, turn the page. Now, just like we did last time, right, we also have to, right, these are not in the right form, so I have to get it equal to 0. So I'm going to get rid of everything on this side by doing the opposite. Okay, so all of these cross out. On this side, we have 4x squared minus 3x squared, which is 1x squared. -3x plus 4x is plus 1x. And 10 minus 4 is plus 6, which equal, and then that's going to be 0 on the other side. So we have 1, 1, and 6. Okay. So then x equals, right, the opposite parentheses plus or minus the square root of parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses parentheses all over 2 parentheses. Whew. So then b comes first, which is 1. And 1 goes here. Then comes our A, which is 1. And our C, which is 6. And then 2 over 1. So x equals, right, -1 plus or minus. We have our square root. And then I'm going to type that in my calculator. So in parentheses, we have 1 squared. We get -23. I don't know why it's jumping. That's fine. We'll write smaller. Over. And then 2 times 1 is 2. not 21. So again, we have that negative, so x equals -1 plus or minus. Pull out our -1. Equals -1, right? Square root 23i. We have to split it up. One plus square root 23i, and x equals -1 minus square root 23i over 2. So then x equals -1/2 plus square root 23/2 I. X equals -1/2 minus square root 23/2 I. -1/2 does not reduce, right? You can type it in your calculator, but it doesn't change.